Welcome to Chapter 5. As you can see, this chapter has to do with make versus buy decisions, insourcing and outsourcing. Now, we've already talked about this a bit in previous classes, but we'll focus more on it, obviously, in chapter number 5. Again, should you make or buy a good or service? These are common business decisions. There's a lot of complexity that can go into them. We're going to talk about some of those factors. So you have some opportunities, business opportunities and strategic opportunities. And one of the questions you always have to ask yourself is, do you have the ability to make or provide the service? So make the product or buy the service. And perhaps you can do part of it. It's not always one or the other. There are cost considerations. There's also considerations of intellectual property and also trying to gain knowledge. Some large companies will simply buy other companies to gain their expertise in the same way that Facebook bought the Oculus for Oculus Quest. So here's some of the reasons. As you can see, there's a really long list. I'm not going to go through each one individually. If you only need a small quantity, you're not likely to go out and learn how to make it yourself. If no supplier wants to make it, then guess what? You have to make it yourself. Again, assurances of supply. If you make it yourself, you may have more confidence that you will actually be able to have the product supplied in the quantity that you want, and potentially also the quality that you want. There may be lower costs either internally or externally, depending on economies of scale and economies of scope. If you are currently underutilizing your capacity, then you may want to increase your usage rather than outsourcing it when you have wasted capacity. You may also want to remove your reliance on a supplier. So you would want to do it internally, and some of the others, which I'm not going to go through it each one in great detail. Again, to make instead of buy, lack of experience, either managerial or technological experiences. Once you outsource, as you can see, it's difficult to reverse. And there may not be, again, there may be insufficient volume for in-house. And in this particular case, you may have a preference for a particular brand of axle or gear or whatever the case may be. So there is a lot of complexity to it, and you will usually wind up with some benefits for insourcing and outsourcing, and same as make versus buy. So rarely is this a fairly obvious choice, and a lot of it can be based on what you've done in the past, because it can be very expensive and problematic to change it. And so the same thing, very similar with insourcing and outsourcing. Do we do it ourselves? Do we do it externally? And I know that it's a major thing that at SAIT many years ago, there was a business case brought forward to outsource food services and cleaning services. And that was probably a good 15 years ago now, and they're still that way to this day. Chartwells provides food services, and I'm not sure of the company who provides cleaning services. Then you have, what do you do with your current cleaning staff? What do you do with your current dietary people if they've been working in, serving food for years? And in case of SAIT, they also have a culinary program, and part of that culinary program is the students are there to learn how to make food. And for fast food places or restaurants or whatever the case. So you also have that aspect. It's not just always as simple as, should you make it yourself especially if it's part of your training program. So you can see here's a little matrix for you to take a look at. Doesn't tell you anything more than what we've already discussed. Reasons to insource, we prefer not to produce the product, but we really don't have any other options. So if you want to make it a certain way, like for myself, when I was, if I want to make my cabbage rolls with bacon, right, Megan? All right, then I can. All right, nobody else does it that way. So it's just kind of different anyways. So hello, Megan, how are you? All right, we would prefer to do this in-house, but it would give us an advantage. And again, for the knowledge and experience that you gain. So here's some necessities, or necessity drivers, I should say. Again, assurance of supply. There's preventing massive price increases from external, and again, regulatory changes, etc. And again, making sure that you have a supply of your key materials, raw materials, or your components. So you may want to assure that your supply chain doesn't break. So in this particular case, when reasons to outsource, a lot of it in the past has been based on cost. There was this almost overwhelming assumption that outsourcing was always cheaper. That has not turned out to be the case. You'd have to be very careful. I am not personally a big proponent of outsourcing. I've seen a lot of times where all of these wonderful cost savings they just disappear. And then you run into all kinds of problems with quality because the housekeeping person doesn't work for you. They work for another organization. If the standard of cleaning isn't up to the standards that you require, it becomes very difficult to remove them. The quality of service that your outsourced organization is providing is just not up to standard. It can be very difficult to terminate the contract. And then you have to find out somebody else, plus all the years of experience and knowledge that is retained in-house. So some organizations, when they've outsourced things and removed their current employees, they lose all of that legacy, that information. Now there's advantages because there's new ways of doing things, whereas your current people are just continuing the same way to a large degree. And again, deciding what should be outsourced. If you look at a school like is the University of Calgary here to do housekeeping or cleaning? No, that's not their core business. Their core business is post-secondary education. So things like, even simple things like maintenance, maintaining the roadways from snow, or perhaps even maintaining the buildings. That's not why the U of C is there. The U of C is there to do the best they can with delivering post-secondary education for adults. And that's a big challenge for them to be able to do that. And they're not there to provide meals. It's an ancillary type of thing, or even a bookstore. That's not a core business, or is it a core business to be able to do that? There's organizations that run bookstores, and especially more in the United States. There are businesses that will go into a campus and they'll run your bookstore for you. And also things, and I've shared stories with you about a company in town who outsourced their personal protective equipment. They no longer keep track of it. They've outsourced it with another company, and that company is responsible for making sure that they're like vending machines have the safety glasses and the gloves, etc., so that the employees have the safety equipment that they require, plus also tracking it and restocking it, and also provide better gloves if the usage of gloves is particularly high, coming out with a different style or than they had before, so that you don't have to use as much, reduce costs. So in this particular case, you have the service triads, as you can see. With service agreements, the buyer contracts with the supplier to deliver the services directly to the buyer's customer. And outsourcing, a help desk is an example of that. Repair or installation of customer equipment. I believe, to a degree, TELUS and Shaw have kind of gone to this method. And you could say that to a degree that when U of C hires contract faculty, that it's kind of a little bit along the same line. And with TELUS and Shaw, the people who work for them are more independent contractors than they are actual employees. So that would be a bit of a difference there. And then again, increased use of performance-based contracts. Today happens to be February 25th of 2021. And today, the provincial government has said they are going ahead with further implementation of performance-based funding for post-secondary schools, as opposed to the previous system, which basically was just based on the number of enrollments. And they are going ahead with that they want to implement a new way of rewarding or punishing, depending on which way you want to look at it, schools for providing graduates that industry wants. That's their mantra. So here's again the triad in a graphical form. So you have the customer, and then you have the buyer and the supplier. So the service demand and the financial flows, and then the service exchange. So this looks a lot like, to a degree, if you remember the from economics, the households and industry, and that graph where the financial money goes from businesses to the households, and then the households take that money and they buy products from the, in this case, manufacturer. Risks of outsourcing, there is very much a loss of control because you can't get to the level of detail that you may need to. And like I said, if you are having troubles with, say, a housekeeping person who's not cleaning rooms properly, then to get rid of that person can be very difficult because you are no longer their boss. And the hiring process, you offload this to somebody else, but it doesn't mean they're going to do a better job than you would have. But then you don't have to have your own housekeeping supervisors, but the outside organization does. You may have, again, unanticipated costs. You may have, again, difficulties quantifying the items, the services or the goods. I mean, clean a room, like what does that mean? There also may be costs to convert to new equipment and or new materials that the outsourcing company uses that you didn't. And so there's also your senior management still needs to pay attention to those types of services. And it can actually reduce your long-term flexibility. So I said before, I'm not a big fan of outsourcing. I'm not a big fan of anything where you just blanket say outsourcing is always better. Let's just jump on board, which was the case for a number of years. And some companies were like lemmings, just all followed along. Oh, they're outsourcing, we better outsource too. And then now there has been somewhat of a change for the last number of years to insource. So you have to just literally take each case by its own merits. So here's the outsourcing decision. Again, I'll let you go through that. It's typical type of business decision about identifying a need, analyzing that need, coming up with proposals or ways to address the need, and then making a decision. So typical decision-making process. You can see in this case, some companies will outsource indirect or non-core activities. You have procure to pay, P2P. You have source to contract and source to pay. examples. So the most frequently outsourced logistics are transactional. So for transportation, warehousing, and freight, for a very long time, Walmart had a company called, they were literally called Supply Chain Management. They had a warehouse in Northeast Calgary, near the corner of Barlow and McKnight by the airport. And they were a separate organization. And Walmart's product would go to that warehouse and then be broken up and decanted and be sent to all of the warehouses, or sorry, the retail stores. But that was a separate organization. Then probably about 7 years ago now, Walmart came along and they said they wanted to buy Supply Chain Management, and they did. They've renamed it Walmart Logistics. Didn't obviously move, the name changed, and a lot of the employees who were working for Supply Chain Management just simply moved over, and they're actual employees of Walmart. So just like Amazon and their fulfillment centers, those people that work in the fulfillment centers are actually Amazon employees. And so as opposed to having a third party do that. So it's, but companies like a company in town like SMED, that used to be in town, they you have the choice. Do you have your own fleet of trucks, or do you have others do it for you? And again, you have to look at the costs. SMED was not in the business of transportation. SMED was very much in the business of making modular office walls and things like that, space, modular office space, and even things like filing cabinets and desks, etc. So here's some of the reasons to outsource your logistics: improve your services, reduce your costs, and focus in on what you're supposed to be good at. If you're not a trucking company, don't try and be a trucking company. You've got then all the issues of what trucks do you buy? Are they full? Things along this line, and maintaining them, and hiring drivers, etc. So when you're dealing with the purchasing role, which is what we're focusing in on in this course so far, you need to identify some opportunities for outsourcing, aid in the selection process, and develop relationships and negotiate. And that's the end of chapter number 5. That was fun.